having that purpose, that contribution is where the energy resides to do the what's in the house that you need to get done. So a lot of organizations, they spend a lot of time on the what's in the house, and they don't spend a lot of diligent time and skilling their leaders to cultivate the why and the who. And you get this energy depletion, this split that happens in organizations where you have more things to accomplish, but you're actually not regenerating the energy needed to accomplish those things. If I were to summarize the last 50 years of research on what contributes to employee engagement, what contributes to motivation, and what contributes to commitment in organizations, I would summarize it in 2 lines.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, Jean Moncrief. Today's conversation is with Zach Mercurio. He's an expert on purposeful leadership who's challenging how we think about purpose in profound ways. His perspective is particularly powerful because it goes beyond the typical corporate purpose statements to something much more fundamental about how we make work truly meaningful for people. In this episode, Zach shares beautiful insights inspired by Stephen Dunn, a line that went along the lines of, "I wanted a job so good, I'd be finishing it for the rest of my life." This led us into a deep exploration of what it really means to be purposeful versus just having a purpose statement. We discussed why purpose isn't something waiting to be found, but rather something that exists right where you are, waiting to be acknowledged. Zach explains why creating purpose statements is only 1% of the work, and that the real challenge is helping people feel they truly matter and showing them how their work makes a difference. So, Zach's upcoming book, The Power of Mattering: How Leaders Can Create a Culture of Significance, comes at a crucial time when workplace dynamics are shifting dramatically. His insights about the growing importance of human connection in an increasingly digital world are both timely and profound. So I hope this conversation offers practical wisdom for owners and leaders and anyone interested in creating a more meaningful work environment. Let's dive in. Zach, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for being on today. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
I'm curious, just kind of to start with, this word purpose has become part of sort of our everyday lives in terms of work and business and everything. Everybody's talking about purpose. And what does purpose mean to you, and how did it fit into your journey?
I like the dictionary. When I get stuck with these words and when things become buzzy, I like going back to the dictionary. And in the dictionary, purpose is defined as the reason for which something is done or created, the reason for its existence, something's use and usefulness. And I like that because that use or usefulness gets at the crux of why purpose works for individuals and organizations, is that it focuses our attention on something that's outside of ourselves. The engine of why purpose is so powerful is transcendence, that the object of our behavior becomes something outside of ourselves. How that relates to me is I was educated to be successful, as most people are. And what I mean by that is I was educated to build a resume, to get specific grades, to get a good starting salary, to get things for myself. It's interesting, and especially in the Western educational model, we educate people to acquire and achieve things. We don't necessarily educate people to contribute.
Yes, that is really interesting.
And I fell victim to that, and I found myself in an entry-level advertising job in digital advertising in the mid-2000s. And I was looking around and I realized that everybody there, the dominant narrative in the office was, what did you do last weekend? What are you doing this weekend? And how do we get more money out of people? It was all about acquiring and achieving. And um, something was missing, right? There was something missing for me. I think we've all had that experience. A lot of people who do this work around purpose have had this experience of experiencing the absence of it. And one of the one of the things that was missing, I felt and I saw, was why we were doing it and who we were doing it for. We focused a lot on the what's in the house, but not on the whys and the who's. And it was that realization, that tension, that really led me to explore purpose. And I'll tell you exactly when it was. I was
I'm
on a
keen to hear
train.
this.
I
Yeah.
was on a train and I was in Washington D.C. and DuPont Circle area, and there was a Barnes and Noble, and this was when bookstores were a thing you stopped in and browsed around in. And there was a book. It was a book of poetry. I didn't even read poetry at the time. On this end cap, it's called Everything Else in the World, and I flipped it to a poem by Stephen Dunn, an American poet. And there's a line in the poem that says, "I wanted a job so good I'd be finishing it for the rest of my life." And I realized that, gosh, I was looking. That's what was missing is I knew the form of my life. People told me how to build a resume, how to get a job, how to acquire and achieve things, but nobody ever really helped me see my function, my why, my purpose. And in design, right? Architectural design, form follows function. Yet the way we develop people, we have them develop the form of their lives, what they should do, the next career steps, without helping them see their function. We also operate businesses this way. We obsess on the form of our businesses, the strategies, the operations, the positioning, and we sort of leave the function of our business, the purpose, up to chance. And
Yeah.
so I've spent the last 10 years since that trying to flip that.
I mean, what you say is so interesting. I had a conversation with Paul Spiegelman, who you'll know from Small
Oh, yeah.
Giants, not so long ago. And
Yeah.
we were talking about our children who are now at the same age and just kind of coming to the end of the university cycles and trying to figure out their purpose in life. And I think what you've just said is so important. We're put through the machine without really help in figuring out what our purpose is. And when we talk about the purpose as we get older, it feels like, hey, focus on getting the degree, focus on sort of getting into a job, and focus on earning money. And that thing that you're thinking about that excites you, or is, how did you put it, sort of outside of you, is maybe not going to make you the money, or you shouldn't be pursuing it. And it's just feels like it is something that's really lacking for younger people as we sort of talk about this.
Yeah, and I actually don't think someone's job or what they do is their purpose. So I think that we've also we also have this false perception that we pressure people into choosing, making sure you choose the right major, making sure you get the right job that aligns with your purpose. I think that's misguided too. Purpose is our usefulness. It's really where your unique strengths make a unique impact. You have strengths right now. You make an impact today. Therefore, you have purpose by default. Your purpose is not out there waiting to be found. It's right where you are waiting to be acknowledged and seen. And I think where we miss when educating and developing people and developing leaders is that we don't spend enough time helping people to be purposeful. So
Mm,
there's a
yeah.
difference between having purpose and being purposeful. Right? You can have a big purpose statement, but not be contribution centered in how you think, be, and act. Right? It's the difference
Yeah,
between,
it's really
it's
interesting.
it's the difference between what do I have to do today, and
Yeah.
how is what I'm going to do today going to impact other people. It's the same. You're asking this. You're starting the day, but the way you frame the day, the way you see the day, is much different. It's the difference between a company thinking about what can we get from people versus how can we best contribute for people. It's the difference between a vice president for sales after a bad quarter sitting down and saying, how do we get the numbers up, versus how can we contribute more to the customers to get the numbers up.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah. Makes
And so what I think is the delivery systems of where our strengths solve problems are all sorts of jobs. I mean, I work with people who can't choose their jobs. I work with cleaners, distribution center packers, warehousing managers, right? A lot of these people can't choose their jobs. They're in positions where they have to take this job. But I've experienced many people who have been able to be contribution centered and deliver their purpose through their job. So I believe we need to educate people and develop people more to be purposeful, contribution centered thinking, being, and doing, to be able to link whatever it is that they're doing today with this inevitable human impact. I call that a so that mentality. I'm doing this so that what? Versus educating people to think, how can I get the most out of this day for me?
Okay. So, in an organization that has a strong sense of why it exists, I would imagine
Mm,
that that might be easier to align with the individual than an organization that hasn't figured that out. Sort of why it exists or why its place in the world. So when you go back to that the sales manager, well, we just want to hit that number. There's the reason for selling this SaaS piece of software is fundamentally we've got to hit a number and we make software and we sell it versus we're trying to make somebody's life easier and doing whatever we do with the software and connecting that individual purpose with a higher purpose of that organization.
Interestingly enough, the organizations that I'm working with the most right now have a clear purpose: healthcare, education, a national park service, government, municipalities. I mean, who exist, the link between what they do and the human beings is so clear. I worked with a group of trauma surgeons that their purpose is literally to save people's lives. They have a job that matters, but they don't experience mattering in their job anymore.
Okay.
Right? You can have a
Yeah.
job that matters and not experience mattering in your job. You can have a big purpose and not be purposeful. I remember I was meeting with all of these executives that gotten together for a roundtable for some of the biggest nonprofits in the U.S. And I asked them what's the biggest problem you faced, and they went around the circle, and the first person said, we need money. We need more money. Yeah, we need donors. We need donor engagement. We need money. Now, these were people who were trying to assist students with autism, end homelessness, end Alzheimer's disease. And they went around and they told me that their biggest problem was money. Money's not their problem. Money is their solution to their problem. This is an example of having a purpose but not being purposeful. Money is the solution to their problem. Donors are the solution to their problem. The problem they exist to solve is people have under-researched Alzheimer's disease. People are on the street, homeless, and they don't have housing. Those are the problems they exist to solve. The purpose, yet they got so distracted by the lagging indicators and the solution to their problem. That's what I mean by the difference between having a purpose and being purposeful and how you approach your everyday and in an organization.
That's really interesting. And I think it's pretty difficult for the average business owner, I imagine, to kind of get their head around the difference between just having a purpose and being purposeful. And how are you helping people to understand that or to kind of come around to that way of thinking?
Well, again, there's a couple of ways to think about it. It's one is, where does your purpose reside in your business? And I know you and I have talked about this,
Yeah.
but imagine that your purpose was your boss. So the purpose was the boss of your decision making. What would our purpose have us do here? And
Okay.
having that purpose be the litmus test that helps guide your decisions is a very powerful tool. That's why in my first book, I called Purpose the Invisible Leader. That actually comes from a late 1920s quote by Mary Parker Follett, who was a brilliant management thinker ahead of her time in the 1920s. And she said, leaders and followers are both following the invisible leader, the common purpose. Purpose, our reason for being, is like the grand storyline of our lives. It aligns all of our actions and our attitudes and our feelings. It's like if you like good art, if you like movies. For example, I like westerns. I know that the reason why I like westerns is because I know that there's going to be a revenge scene. Like revenge is the through line, right? So I know what to
Yeah.
expect. Even if the beginning's a little bit boring, I know what's going to happen. It's pulling me through. When you have an embedded purpose, it serves as that storyline. But when you don't have that purpose, you get a lot of wasted energy and a lot of confusion when it's not embedded, when it's not real, when it's not the litmus test. For example, you become stressed out because you're stressed out something's happening. You don't become stressed out because you're working on a hard problem to end homelessness. You don't become stressed out because you're working to improve customers' lives. You're just reacting to things without the purpose living as a living storyline that harmonizes your energy, your reactions, your attitudes. So one of the ways that we're helping leaders is taking that contribution and making it real and tangible in the evidence that's around an individual every day, and as the benchmark and litmus test through which you make decisions and act and respond and react.
Okay, so there were a few things that were interesting. One, this idea that the purpose may somehow be buried and exist already inside an organization. We might not be aware of it. It kind of
Sure. And I will say right here, there's a big difference between a cause and a purpose. A lot of organizations try to create and manufacture a social cause, and they confuse it with purpose. So what I mean by that is it's like um, for example, I worked with a company who manufactures mirrors, and they put it on
okay. Yeah.
cars. They every mirror you see, side mirror, you put it on a car. Why do you have mirrors on cars? They're you have mirrors on cars so that people can drive safely. All this
Yes.
technology so they can back up and see a kid running in a driveway. Yet they were struggling. They're like, oh, we just put parks in boxes. So they had tried to manufacture this big social purpose and they aligned it with a nonprofit they were giving to, which is all great. But that's actually not the reason for existence. The reason for existence is to ensure human beings who are living complex, vivid, and important lives are able to get to and from the places they're going, to visit people who love them, who need them safely.
Yeah.
So oftentimes I think we try to manufacture purpose causes, especially in the last decade or so when purpose became popular, instead of really thinking about what is the contribution we make. And a great question to ask is, what would be lost if we were gone?
Mm.
Who would miss us and why? And usually, I think any job, any organization that currently exists on the planet has a human-centered purpose.
I love that connection to the human. I mean, we were in very similar industries as far as that sort of client. I worked with a company that manufactures brake fluid, and we may have spoken about that in the past. But their whole purpose was always to stop the world safely. And while there are changes going on in their industry at the moment, they're kind of looking at 15 years ahead and how they sort of shift to keep making sure that they are meeting that purpose, whether it's through hydraulic fluid or some other way. But everybody who's on the
Mm,
line and who's bottling things every single day knows that the reason that they're there and that they're all contributing is to help stop the world safely, to stop people
mm,
safely when they apply those brakes, whether you're in a Formula One car or
mm.
driving home with your children in the car. Um, and that is
And
that
that has to be
human centric
embedded,
purpose.
right? And that has to be
Yeah.
embedded. So people have to see it and feel it daily. And that's a skill. So, for example, one skill of doing that, and I always say that, purposeful leaders tend to show people the evidence of their significance regularly, right? They don't just tell people that they matter, they show them exactly how their job matters. One of the best stories of that is when NASA was launching the Apollo missions, and Wharton School scholars researched what NASA did during that time to get over 300,000 contract workers, many of whom would not even be employed by NASA when they accomplished or didn't accomplish this precarious mission. How they got them all to see how very small tasks fit into this purpose of putting a person on the moon by the end of the decade to advance science, which just sounded crazy, which was a crazy mission, when you really think about it. And what NASA found is that on blackboards at NASA facilities, they all had what was called a ladder to the moon. So
Okay.
at the top was the purpose: put a person on the moon by the end of the decade. You can put, if you're a leader listening, you can put your purpose at the top there. But at the bottom was the group's tasks for that month. And then at the top, next rung up from that task group, was a tangible, measurable objective that task made possible. Above that rung was a measurable, tangible objective that objective made possible. And then all the way up to how those monthly tasks would put a person on the moon by the end of the decade. And what I love about the practice, right, of laddering is that you're showing people, it's inescapable, measurably, that what you're doing has an inevitable impact on something important. I think too many organizations have a big purpose at the top of the ladder, but they haven't done the work to make sure that people at all levels experience it daily through something in their environment that reminds them of the evidence of that purpose.
So it's keep reinforcing, this is our purpose, this is our North Star, this is where we're heading. And I love that analogy with NASA putting the ladder on the chalkboard, moon at the top, and something in a digital world we maybe forget to do these days because we're not in the offices with everybody as much. But how do you reinforce that purpose and embed it in the organization, and show that the small contributions that are being made every day are moving us towards that ultimate purpose, which we may never get to in some instances. I imagine it keeps pulling us in that direction, but that we're making progress toward that through the priorities that we're setting and the things that we're working on.
And I think, it's an interpersonal skill. A lot of people don't think of being purposeful as an interpersonal skill, but it is. One of those skills is laddering. Like, being able to do that is a skill, communicating in that way. When you communicate a task, when you delegate a task, before you tell someone what to do or how to do it, make sure you show them very vividly why it matters to another human being, what it's necessary for, and then remind people how they can use their strengths to do it. Right? When you're recruiting for a job, it starts there. I see job descriptions all the time where at the top it says, here's the job, here's what we pay, here are your benefits, here's what you get for doing this. And then there's like, here's what you'll do in your job. That is not purposeful. So, like, if you were writing a job description, as an example, put the human problem that the job exists to solve at the top. Put the tasks that this job does and what those tasks are necessary for to accomplish some bigger outcome. Name the strengths you need for people to do this meaningful work, and then say, oh, by the way, and here's what you get for doing it. See, oftentimes the way, again, you go back to the start of this, the way we educate, the way we develop, the way we do things is backward. We start with the form instead of the function, the what and the how instead of the why. But having that purpose, that contribution, is where the energy resides to do the what's in the house that you need to get done. So a lot of organizations, they spend a lot of time on the what's in the house, and they don't spend a lot of diligent time and skilling their leaders to cultivate the why and the who. And you get this energy depletion, this split that happens in organizations where you have more things to accomplish, but you're actually not regenerating the energy needed to accomplish those things. So
yeah, I love this. We talked about this last time.
we have, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the important key points is to make sure that leaders, anybody who influences anybody, has the interpersonal skills to show people the evidence of their significance, to delegate and describe tasks purposefully, to keep coming back to the purpose, to collect and tell stories of significance. I worked with a great manager at the National Park Service, and he worked with all the facilities managers, and they do maintenance in very remote places, very hard work, often overlooked. They don't get to see a visitor enjoying the park, right? They're
Yeah.
cleaning the bathroom, fixing a bridge. And he realized this. And what he did is every week he'd go out into the park and take photos of visitors using something that they worked on, whether it was a bridge or whether it was using a facility or a store or a restaurant. And he would email those photos every Friday morning and say, look what you did. You enabled this to happen, right? That's a skill that people can't escape the fact that they and their job matters. When you say thank you to somebody, a lot of people say, hey, thank you or good job. Instead of saying thank you or good job, show them the difference they make, how they make it, name their strengths. And what's exciting about this is that these are skills. And I think that this is what's missing when an organization has a purpose, but leaders don't have the skills to be purposeful.
So we sit down in a room, we invest in consultants and folks coming in to figure out this purpose. Very often, something I notice is that purpose, I think you pointed out earlier, that there isn't this human connection. It's sometimes just kind of a purpose for the sake of having a purpose. I guess the next thing is, once we've got that very clear purpose and we manage to connect it to some kind of human contribution, then how do we make sure that the leadership team, and as things filter down to the rest of the people within the organization, aren't just saying thank you, but are connecting that purpose to the thank you, is what you're saying, kind of bringing this together. How do we help leaders and business owners to get in touch with this human contribution? Yeah, I think that's always one of the big challenges I face when working with leadership teams, is connecting that why. And I love the way you put human contribution.
Well, I think you have to start small. You have to start with connecting people to how they impact the person next to them,
Yeah.
how they impact you as a leader. For example, when I go into a room and I say, how many of you all have been to a workshop on how to give critical feedback? Everybody raises their hand. But if I go into a room and I say, how many of you have been to a workshop on how to give positive affirmation? Nobody raises their hand. If I go into a workshop and say, how many of you all have been to a session on operational excellence? Someone will raise their hand.
Hand
If
up.
I say, how many of you have been to a session on human excellence, human skills, how to see, hear, value someone else? Most people don't raise their hands, right? So we're very good at scaling things in organizations. If you're an organization that exists, you scale operations, products, finances, financial processes all the time. But are you scaling the essential human processes that connect people to their contribution? And the framework that I use, and the engine of all of this, really the engine. I mean, the leading indicator. If I were to summarize the last 50 years of research on what contributes to employee engagement, what contributes to motivation, and what contributes to commitment in organizations, I would summarize it in 2 lines. One, it is impossible for something to matter to someone who doesn't first believe that they matter. And 2, people will not care until they feel cared for. And that engine of purpose, the prerequisite of purpose, is making sure people feel like they matter to you. And there are 3 major skill areas that you can think about as a leader right now. As you're thinking about the people in your organizations who influence other people, do people have the skills to truly see and hear others, to notice them? Do they have the skills to recognize people's unique gifts and show them how those unique gifts make a difference? And then do people have the skills to make sure everybody feels indispensable to the bigger purpose and sees that every day through skills like laddering or showing people exactly how they connect to the bigger purpose? Because what's happened is a lot of times we leave those things up to intuition,
Yeah. Yeah.
but intuition doesn't
Doesn't.
scale in an organization. Practices and skills scale.
So as we need to be thinking as leaders about how we are paying attention to that human system inside the organization and how we're thinking about that human system being able to scale kind of pace with the growth of the business.
Absolutely. I once worked with, I won't name them, but I got to work with a company that sets up all of the product in grocery stores. And they had asked me to come and work with them because they were trying to infuse their people first culture into the front line, to increase retention and all of that. And I was at lunch with a group of leaders in the company, and I said, "Hey, tell me what you do to ensure that product is properly placed on time in your stores." And they were all excited. They showed me all of their flow charts, all of their systems, and it was great. And I was really excited. I was like, "This is cool." And then I asked, "What do you do to ensure everybody on the front line feels seen, heard, valued, and needed?" And it was this like big pause, this like pregnant pause in the room. And one guy said, "Well, we have this supervisory excellence and supervisory online module that people have to watch." Or someone said, we try to hire the right people and trust that they'll do the right thing." So what I'm getting at is we tend to leave the most important things to human beings up to intuition and over index on all of the operational things. What I want to see organizations do is over index on the human things, because
Okay.
the
Yeah.
human beings are the lagging indicators. I mean, are the leading indicators of all the lagging indicators you want, like performance, engagement, motivation, right? The three necessary psychological states for employee engagement, for example, everybody measures engagement, but they're measuring a lagging indicator. The three predictors are psychological meaningfulness. I have to know that I and what I'm doing matters. You can probably see a theme here. Psychological safety. I have to be able to speak up
Yeah.
and to not feel fear. And psychological availability. I need to know someone's here to support me. So if you want engaged employees, you should be making sure that people know how they and what they're doing matters, that they feel cared for, and that there's someone to support them. But oftentimes I see organizations doing these engagement surveys and then trying to get engagement up without reskilling leaders to do the things that are the leading indicators of engagement. And that's why
Yeah. We.
purpose is such a powerful object, because and it's such a powerful leader in an organization of itself, because it serves as that object that's outside of the behavior that directs everybody toward that. It's that bigger so that, and it makes it easier for people to see how they matter when that purpose is clear, which is why it's incredibly powerful for engagement, motivation, productivity, performance, all of those lagging indicators.
And we were talking a little bit about culture a little while ago and how we connect purpose and culture. And it feels like as the organization grows, if that culture isn't geared toward building the human side, then this kind of starts to crumble. So I
Yeah.
imagine culture plays an integral role in kind of bringing this all together and making sure that the pull of the purpose is actually is supported and carrying everybody along.
And many people don't even know what culture means. So if I sit down with a room of leaders and I say, in the same company, I say, "What is culture?" Everybody will have a different meaning of culture, right? Culture really is our set of beliefs, what we assume to be true of the organization and why we're here and who we are. Our values, which are what we espouse and what we enact. That's important. There's a difference. And then the artifacts, like our environment, like what's in the environment. What are the signals? What are the symbols of the organization? But beliefs are powerful, and beliefs are what we assume to be true. Now, how do we develop beliefs? We develop beliefs not by sitting in our offices and willing ourselves to believe something. We develop beliefs based on what's in our environment. So our environment reaffirms what we assume to be true. For example, that NASA story, one of the stories that's told often is when John F. Kennedy went to the Space Center to launch the Apollo missions, he went into a green room. He thought it was a green room. It was actually a mop closet. And he saw a janitor there. And he said to the janitor, "Hey, what do you do here?" Silly question. But the janitor very calmly said, "Oh, Mr. President, I'm putting a person on the moon." That's a nice story, but now if we pair it to the research on NASA's laddering technique, we can see that that belief, I'm just putting a person on the moon, was fairly natural because it
Yeah.
arose from what's in that person's environment every day. That janitor sees that ladder, knows that that's what they're doing, so they start to believe it. You're sitting in a chair right now because you believe that structure, that chair is for sitting in, because you've come in and sat in a chair over and over and over again. So, how do we cultivate belief? Our environment. What's in our environment? How do we build environment? Interpersonal interactions, right? That reaffirm our significance every day. And this is often what's missing. That underlying, if you look at the iceberg, and Edgar Schein is a great culture scholar, but if you look at the iceberg of culture, your values and artifacts, symbols and mission statements and stuff's at the top of the water, but beliefs are below. And oftentimes, when an organization is trying to set a culture, they focus on the artifacts, the programs, the recognition programs, the appreciation programs, the mission statement, the stated values. But they neglect the interpersonal interactions that people experience in their environment every day that form their beliefs about who we are and why we are.
And by not reinforcing those and bringing them to life, neglecting we're neglecting the most important work that needs to be done, which is making sure that those beliefs are in line with what we actually are doing.
Yeah, and not only that, but like say you're working for that company that puts mirrors on cars to make sure people get to and from where they're going safely. And say you state that purpose, but then a person on the line comes in to work every day and they feel unsafe making a mistake or speaking up to their leader. Um, or they come into work every day and they feel degraded, or they feel like they're just a number or just a resource day after day, and then expecting that person to believe that they're promoting safety in the world when they don't experience it in themselves.
When they experience safety in the workplace themselves.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Is a lot
Got
of
it.
what's
Yeah.
happening in a lot of organizations. One of the most psychologically devastating things for an individual is being told to believe something and then experiencing the opposite in your environment. Hey, you're making a difference, and then going in every day and being told you better get the numbers up or you're out of here.
And it's probably more common than it is than
Oh,
not.
that's
I mean
very
that.
common. I mean, I
Yeah.
see it. I have worked with a group of trauma surgeons at a large hospital system whose job is to save people's lives, who don't experience purpose in their work anymore because they're told to be more efficient, they're told to do more with less, and they're treated like a resource. So they start feeling like just a resource, and they become divorced from their impact. This is what's largely happened in our whole notion of work as a society. When we started as humans, all work was purposeful. I went and hunted and gathered food so you could eat. I was a shoemaker so you could walk around and have shoes. But what happened in the Industrial Revolution is all of a sudden someone could give me some money to make the sole of a shoe and I didn't have to see the full product. So I just went in. If I got enough money to be quiet, I would take the money and I would only see a part of what I did and then I'd go home. And over time what's happened is that gap between what we're doing and why we're doing it, that contribution has widened as a society as well. And this happens in organizations as well. Purposeful people and purposeful organizations make sure that the what and the how and the why stay tightly coupled. And these practices and skills we've been talking about through interpersonal interactions from a leadership standpoint is the way in which we do that.
I want to go back to something you said at Small Giants, which I think ties into where we're moving. You talked about moving into an era of relationships and the importance of relationships and the importance of feeling valued and cared for in the workplace. How is that sort of shaping what you're thinking at the moment in terms of what's coming up with AI and how we are working and the change in the way that we're working?
Yeah, relationships are everything, and they will be more so. They always have been, but I think that one of the things that happens is that we say things like people it's going to become more important in the workplace, right? Like relationships are going to become more. Relationships were always important in the workplace, but now how people feel and making sure people feel significant in the workplace and valued in the workplace is not only important, it's going to be inescapable. So there are several forces acting upon the world of work, right? One is that people are demanding dignity.
Yeah.
Since 4 years ago, a lot of people called it the Great Resignation after the recession, here in the States. But it was really a demand for dignity. When you look at the last 4 years of data on why people left organizations without another job lined up, toxic culture, feeling disrespected, unincluded, or exploited was at number one, 10 times more likely to predict someone leaving than was pay or benefits alone. And then failure to recognize employee performance. 30% of people feel invisible at work from a work human study. 25% feel flat out ignored. 65% feel undervalued. Okay. So you have that going on. You have a country who told essential workers that they're essential, and now they're coming back into our economy and workplaces asking, do I feel essential? But all of that is happening in a context of infinitely increasing choice. And I think this is really important for people to really listen to. Educational attainment and literacy rates in the world are going up. And gig work, access to ways to make money outside of the traditional working environment is infinitely increasing. I mean, researchers estimate by 2030, 50% of people will be involved in gig work in some way. So the choices of when, where, and how to work are infinitely increasing. Now, in psychology, when people have more choice, it's called volition. And when people have more volition, they have more discernment. And when people have more discernment, they discern what they want to do based on how they feel. So as people have more choice of where, when, and how to work, they are going to discern where they do it more and more based on how they feel. And how they feel is dictated through their relationships. And with the rise of AI is going to be taking over most operational tasks and analytical tasks that have built our economy. So what do we have left? Well, what we have left is the ability to make the person in front of us feel seen, heard, valued, and needed.
Yeah.
And so all of those things are coming together to necessitate a move to what I believe, and a lot of commentators believe this, is that we're moving towards a relationship economy. And in fact, there was a recent survey done by LinkedIn of executives, and 70% said that relational skills would be more important to their business in 10 years than operational or technical skills.
So as we evolve, or as the way we work changes, and as this becomes more important, this idea, or this having a competitive or a clear sense of purpose as an organization becomes more and more of a competitive advantage, because you're going to be pulling the people that really want to be there. Now, before we started, you talked about the work that you're doing on the new book and how we sort of make sure that those individuals feel like they, because as we sort of move toward more and more discernment and more more of a gig economy, folks have more choice. So how do we, as leaders, start to make sure that the individuals are more connected and feel more like they're purposeful? Or that, how
Well,
do we
for
do
example,
that?
researchers find that less than 1% of the world gets formal education in how to listen to another human being.
Jeez, that's actually unbelievable. Wow.
Formal education, right? So, for example, so our ability to use these basic human skills, which traditionally were passed on in communities and in families. This is how you listen. This is how you tell stories. This is how you include people. With the advent of our use of technology to communicate via short transactions, what's happening is we actually don't even realize that by not using the skills to sit with a person, to hear a person, to validate a person, to affirm a person, to truly see a person and become interested in a person, by not using those skills and relying on technology for short transactions on Slack, Teams chat, email, we're actually losing the skill. We're becoming less
Ah, yeah.
proficient in these human skills, and we don't even know what's happening. We think we're doing all of these things and it's easier. But what we're actually losing is we're losing the ability to make the person in front of us feel significant to us. And this is why, regardless of the amount of loneliness books and TED Talks that have come out in the last 10 years, loneliness continues to go up. And why is that? When you look at the research on loneliness, the predictor of loneliness is not being alone. The predictor of loneliness is not feeling like you matter to people around you. The opposite of loneliness is not having more connections. It's feeling like you're valued and you add value to the connections around you. Acquaintances, people you see every day, people on the in the workplace. When you jump onto that Zoom call and you're early, that person who talks with you and asks you real questions about your life. Those are the little practices that we're missing. Those are the human skills that we're missing and that we need to have a massive reskilling and redevelopment to 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 counteract the fallout of our lack of proficiency from not using these skills for the last 15 years of communicating with each other via short digital transactions.
So that's one of the things that we've got to be conscious of, again, as leaders, as bringing up children, even that these are the skills that we need to be investing in to make sure that we are kind of adding value to the world ourselves.
Yeah, and I think like this technology is fine, right? It's good. It can
Yeah,
connect us in ways we wouldn't be having this conversation if the technology didn't exist. Where it becomes a problem is you can send me some good news, right? Say you got a new job, and I can just write back to you, great, smiley face, right? I don't have to have the skill to sit with you and say, hey, I've really noticed that you've been working hard on this, and I'm not surprised because you have these strengths, and I'm really happy for you. Or if someone gives us some bad news at work or says they're stressed out on a Slack channel, we can just be like, me too, can't wait for the weekend, sad
yeah.
emoji or whatever. We don't have to say, hey, uh, tell me more about how you're feeling. I'm noticing that you're frustrated. What can I take off your plate? Right? That's a skill. And those are the skills that are going to separate the companies that don't have labor shortages and don't have perpetual talent problems with those who do.
So coming up with this purpose is 1% of what we've got to do. The real work is what lies underneath and everything we've been
Yeah,
talking
and
about.
I would say that you have to as an organization have some sort of contribution and name the contribution you're making to human beings in a very realistic measurable way. But then make sure that you have a culture and leaders are skilled to make sure every individual feels like they matter
I
and
love
knows
that.
exactly how they matter.
That
And I
sums it
think
up.
I think that one of the ways the purpose movement went awry is that everybody started creating these big purpose statements because they feel good. But what we didn't do is reskill our leaders to enable people to see how they matter to that purpose every day.
Yeah, I think that really encapsulates the conversation, what we've spoken about for the last 40 odd minutes. I,
And then the
I'm,
other thing I said, this should be exciting
yeah, it should be.
because it's really going back to these essential human skills. And none of this is a new program, a new initiative. I'm not asking you to buy new technology, a new app, nothing.
No,
All of this goes back to, okay, how do we make sure that the people in our organization have the skills to optimize the interactions they already have to make sure everybody feels significant?
it's really just going back to building those skills that we've lost.
Yeah.
And that should be exciting. As you say, it's not a new
And it is.
technology.
And when you do it, like when you do it because people have been experiencing the lack of it for so long, I mean, 60% of people self report in surveys of over 10,000 people that they feel lonely. So you can bet that, you know, 2/3 of your team feels lonely, whether they're telling you or that or not.
Yeah.
When you invest in it, when you make that real connection and you see somebody come alive and you see somebody share something with you they wouldn't have shared, share a struggle that you can help them with, and then the organization learns from that as a whole, that's where you start to see the real power of this. I mean, the
That's so
human
powerful.
magic of this.
So you got a new book coming out in May next year. What's it
Yeah,
called?
it's called The Power of Mattering: How Leaders Can
Power of
Create a
Mattering.
Culture of Significance. And
And
and so it's taking, I liken it actually. It's both the prequel and the sequel to my last book in a sense,
okay.
because the purpose is that it's that bigger, it's a force, right? It's the force in the organization. And that's what I was focusing on. But this is, how do you make sure people believe that they contribute?
So we've
And
got this invisible leader, this force, the
you have this
pull.
invisible leader, but how do you make sure people believe that they're worthy of contributing to that through making sure they feel like they matter? And then how do you cultivate a culture that sustains the belief that I'm significant enough to contribute to that? So, I mean, I think they'll be great companions, but the mattering work is really about the interpersonal relationships that comprise a culture, and how do we create relationships in which people feel valued and know how they add value.
I'm curious, is what you're researching and you're feeling that people are feeling more and more insignificant and in the world, and that's
Oh yes, I mean, when I even name the feeling of feeling insignificant or undervalued or looked over as feeling like you don't matter, and the consequences of feeling like you don't matter are, in the research, are acts of withdrawal. So, like quiet quitting, for example, that
yeah.
whole trend. I mean, quiet quitting is the inevitable withdrawal response to someone who feels insignificant, right? I'm just going to do the bare minimum and get by. It's also called learned helplessness. I've been conditioned by my environment to believe that what I do or what I don't do won't matter. Or feelings of insignificance result in acts of desperation, complaining, blaming, gossip, toxic behaviors. Oftentimes, those are attention seeking behaviors because people feel like they're overlooked or they're insignificant. You see this in a macro level in society as well. And I mean, Martin Luther King, right, said it well when he said, a protest is the language of the unheard.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of the behavioral problems we see in our organizations is the language of the unheard, the unseen, people who have been overlooked. But the difference is now, especially after the pandemic, they're realizing they've been overlooked. And that's where we get that demand for dignity that we're seeing in the data of why people are leaving organizations.
I really enjoyed your first book, and I feel like that invisible leader should have a seat at the table
Yes, I love
with
that.
every
I love
leadership
that.
team. We should be conscious every single day, and I think it speaks to how you talked about kind of just embedding the purpose into the DNA. 1% is coming up with a purpose, but it's the other 99% that is embedding into the DNA of the business. I really enjoyed your book, and I'm looking forward to what's coming next in May.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that we're at a great point. Actually, I'm optimistic about organizations really realizing that they have to invest in this, and the
We're
signs are
starting,
there.
yeah, signs are there that
Um,
we're understanding this is so important.
and I'm optimistic. A lot of people are,
Yeah.
oh, what's wrong with leaders? What's wrong with organizations? I don't feel that way at all. I feel a lot of empathy for leaders. I feel a lot of empathy for executives and organizations who have had to push for the last 10, 20 years to stay relevant, to survive through recessions and a lot of global issues. And a lot of their worth is hinged on quarterly earnings reports, and that's difficult. I have a lot of empathy. But I think now people are really starting to see that really I would say I'm going to go a step further. I would say the ultimate social purpose of a company is to make sure that the people who spend a third of their waking lives there feel noticed, affirmed, and needed. And they
Yeah, I
go
love
home
that.
better people and they come in better people the next day.
That's
And we
fantastic.
can do that in
Yeah.
every job. Seth Godin, in his latest book, Song of Significance, he
I haven't
said,
read that one yet.
yeah, but he has a line that says, what if the job that you created for someone was the best job they ever had, regardless of whatever it is? How can we make the job the person has the best job they've ever had?
That's such an interesting way of looking at the jobs that we're creating and
Yeah,
how we think about them. And again, it ties back to what you're saying earlier about moving purpose to the top. You know,
right.
when we create that scorecard or job role, what's the purpose? What are we? You know, what are the key things that you need to be doing? What are the core values? But bringing all of that together, um, yeah, fantastic. I'm conscious of time, Zach, and I don't want to
Yeah.
hold you up.
And
You've got
again,
a
I
very
just think
busy
of that
schedule.
person
And
who's on the line, doing the brake fluid. And I
yes,
think of them coming home, and I think of them having a 7 or 8 year old kid. And I think of them coming to the dinner table, being really excited to share with their family how important they are and how
yeah,
important their job is, and what that does to a family system, a community, when people feel significant, regardless of what they do. Um,
regardless of what they do, and
exactly.
that's
Like that's like for me, that's what it's all about.
yeah,
When someone can feel proud of themselves, proud of the work that they're doing, feel
and it's
dignified.
and it's so important that I think the the sort of leaders that are coming up on who are coming up and as you were saying earlier that this idea of the importance of purpose has taken hold, that those ideas or that feeling of making sure that the style of leadership is the right style of leadership, that it isn't eroded from the sort of top down, that stays alive, because that's what's going to carry us through to this transformation that I think you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, brilliant.
Thank
Let
you.
me thank you so much, and it's been fantastic.